All right, I'm coming to you from the 14th floor of the magnificent Livnos College for Women campus building, the nerve center, the headquarters. And I want to share a quick thought with you for Pesach. I hope that it will enhance your appreciation of the Chag. Just parenthetically, as by way of introduction, Rabbi Nebenzahl comments that there are two types of divrei Torah that we find in the Haggadah, in Perushim on the Haggadah. He said that on the night of the Haggadah, really on the night of the Seder, we're supposed to properly be speaking about divrei Torah that describe the process of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the various nisim, the makos, and the nisim and niflaos, all the events that surrounded the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Mitzrayim. And he says there are a lot of like clever little pshatlach and insights and tangential kind of thoughts. He says very often you see that Gedolei Yisrael Mefarshim include these ideas in their Perushim on the Haggadah. And he said, but those are intended for after the Sedarim, to share during Chol HaMoed, Shabbos Chol HaMoed. There are a lot of Yontif meals and there are a lot of meals every day. At every meal, we should be sharing divrei Torah. So he says it's important to make a distinction and to include in the Seder the divrei Torah that are relevant to the discussion of the topic proper of that evening. So with that in mind, how to characterize this, I'll let you decide that. The idea I want to share with you comes from the Chanukah Torah, and I'm going to elaborate on it just a little bit. We know the famous Chazal, and some people suggest, they propose that this is the basis for the practice that we have of taking out the various drops. At the Seder, we spill a little bit of wine, a few drops of wine. I think it's a total of 16. So we take those drops of wine and we think of that as it's somehow tied. We could trace it back to this Chazal. The Chazal tells us, it's in Megillah, Masechta Megillah, it's in Masechta Sanhedrin, Bigshu Malachi Hasharet Lomar Shira. The Malachi Hasharet, they wanted to sing Shira. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you want to sing Shira? Maaseh Yadai Tovin Bayam, Vatem Rotzin Lomar Shira, and you want to say Shira? Lachein, therefore, and then there's a pasuk. The Medrash brings us, the Chazal brings us to the pasuk in Shemos, where it says, as a result, v'lo korav ze el ze kol halayla. Now, we're used to thinking of that pasuk. The meaning of it is that there was some kind of a pillar, a fire of cloud that prevented the camps of the Mitzrayim and the camps of the Bnei Yisrael from approaching each other. So, but the fact, the language of it, because we know from davening, we talk about v'kara ze el ze v'yamar. That's when the malachim approach one another to sing Shira. They unite together, v'kara ze el ze, and in unison they call one to the other, and then they proclaim the kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the similarity of the language causes us to take notice. Look at the passage. Go karav ze el ze. Well, in this case, right, the Gemara is telling us it's not the deeper meaning. It's not that the machane of the Mitzrayim and the machane of the Bnei Yisrael, that they didn't approach it. That's on the simplest level, on the surface. That's what it means. But on a deeper level, the Malachi Asharis, they did not approach each other and sing that Shira. Now let's look at that. If we look at that Chazal, Bikshu Malachi Asharis Lomar Shira. The Malachim wanted to sing Shira. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Maaseh Yadai Tovin, my handiwork, Tovin Bayam, they drown in the ocean, in the sea, and you want to sing Shira? That's a very compelling argument. And we use that as the basis. Very often we think of our compassion for the Mitzrayim, and we say, wow, terrible thing. And our joy is not complete at the Seder because of the suffering, the loss of human life of the Mitzrayim, who could have, let's say in another reality, they could have chosen the option of doing teshuva. That would have been a much better option, and everyone could have chosen to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu together. The fact that they did not, and they stayed in their wicked practices, and they pursued that course of action all the way to the end, well, it ended up in the loss of all of that Mitzri life. Of course, we mourn that. But let's see if that's what the Chazal is telling us, if this, in fact, is the source. The Chanukah Torah, the Rebbe of Heschel, so Reb Heschel poses two questions. One is a technical one is a philosophical question. He says, well, wait a minute. It talks about that. If you look at the context, you look at the psukim, This is an event that took place, v'lo korav zeh el zeh, that took place in the middle of the night. That was taking place during the night before. Now, Kriyas Yamsuf took place in the morning. If you look, Rashi tells us that it was in the Ashmora closest to the morning. So when this event, this conversation, this exchange between the Malachim and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was taking place, it was probably about a good 5-6 hours before, in fact, there was this event, the Kriyas Yamsuf. So the drowning of the Mitzrayim at the Yamsuf. That's question number one. Question number two, Rav Heschel poses, he says, well, wait a minute. King Shlomo tells us, Ba'avod Risha'im Rina, when the Risha'im are destroyed, when justice, divine justice is meted out to them, in fact, there's Rina, there's celebration in Shamayim. These Mitzrayim were Risha'im, and what they were doing, the way they were pursuing the Am Yisrael, they deserved to be punished. And when we encounter the downfall of the Risha'im, in fact, King Shlomo tells us, Ba'avod Risha'im Rina, then we celebrate. So Rav Heschel says, because of a technical question in terms of the chronology, the fact that this event took place, this conversation, the request of the Malachim and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response took place hours before what in fact had happened. So this concept of v'lo karav zeh el zeh, so we're talking about something that took place way far before. And number two, the question of a philosophical one. Wait a minute, hashkafically, ba'avod rishayim rina. So what is the Chazal talking about? So Rav Heschel, in fact, proposes a different reading for the Medrash, and he proposes this reading. If you remember in Malachim Beis, so the Sancheriv, the king of Ashur, had sent his legions, his armies, and they had surrounded Yerushalayim in the times of Chizkiyahu. And there were armies beyond innumerable, soldiers surrounding Yerushalayim. Chizkiyahu and the Jewish people went to sleep, secure in the knowledge that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was protecting them. And the pasuk tells us that a malach Hashem vayach, this malach struck the army of Ashur. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, in what way? How did the malach strike these soldiers, this encampment? So the Gemara entertains a few possibilities. It tells us that in fact what the malach did was it opened the ears of all of these enemy combatants, these soldiers. It opened their ears and allowed them to hear the shira that the malachim sing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the grandeur of that, the majesty. It was too much for their earthly forms to endure, and it burned them out from the inside. It just consumed them. Their hearing the shira that the malachim sing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was too much. It overwhelmed them and it destroyed them. So that took place later in history. But Rav Heschel proposes that the malachim said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that fateful night, Bigshu Malachi Asharet Lomar Shira. The Malachim wanted to sing Shira to Hashem. Now they're always singing Shira to Hashem. But what they wanted, they said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they requested, and they said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, these people, these wicked people, from the very beginning, Moshe Rabbeinu came to them and he said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, the God of the Jewish people, requests that you let the Jews out. B'ni B'chari Yisrael, let them out that they may serve me. And Paro and all of the nation of Mitzrayim, they responded, they said, who's this Hashem? What are we talking? Who's Hashem? We don't know who he is. The affront, the outrage to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's honor. So the Malachim said, it's time to punish them. Mida keneged mida, allow us, please HaKadosh Baruch Hu, allow us that we should enable the Mitzrayim to hear the song of Kedusha. We acknowledge your Kedusha. Let the Mitzrayim hear that and it will destroy them. And it's only fitting, mida keneged mida. The punishment should be proportional, should be appropriate for the crime. They denied your honor, and therefore the means of their downfall should be that they should hear, they should be acquainted right up close with a full measure, a description of your Kedusha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu replied and he said, I understand that analysis, and I understand the principle of divine judgment of mida keneged mida. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, but there's something more important to me here. Maaseh yadai. Masayadai, my Jewish children, my beloved Jewish children, Tovin Bayam. If you look at the Chazal, it talks about Tovin Bayam. They're drowning in the water. That was the diuk, and I mentioned the technical diuk about how this conversation had taken place hours before. So Rav Heschel had pointed out that the language that's used, Chazal talk about tovin in the present tense. They drown in the yam. And as I mentioned before, that drowning wasn't going to take place for several hours after. It would take place several hours later. So Rav Heschel pointed out, one of his questions was, right, what it should have said, right, Maaseh Yadai will drown, something about that, the grammar. So according to this, Rav Heschel's proposed read makes perfect sense of it. Maaseh Yadai Tovin Bayam. It's a regular practice that Mitzrayim have, that Maaseh Yadai, my handiwork, my Jewish children, my beloved Jewish children, they drown in the water regularly. They drown the Jewish boys. What an outrage to my beloved Jewish people. And if there's judgment, if there's justice, it demands that the honor of the Jewish people be addressed. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what Rav Heschel is proposing is that there were two punishments that needed to be meted out, and there were two applications of the principle of midah keneged midah. Number one was for the affront to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's honor, and number two was for the affront to the Jewish people's honor. So the Malachim said, we're so makpidim on your honor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let us enable the Mitzrayim to hear the shira of the Malachim. The Mitzrayim should hear it, and it will destroy them. That's appropriate. It's a fitting punishment for their crime. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm not makpid on my kavod. I'm makpid on the kavod of the Jewish people. Maaseh Yadai, my children, my handiwork, my beloved Jewish children. Tovin Bayam is a regular practice. The Mitzrayim drowned them in the water. Vatem rotzim lomar shira, and you want to sing shira? You want to be concerned, midah keneged midah, for my honor? There's a much more important affront here. It's the honor of the Jewish people. Lachein, as a result of that, the Malachim understood, and they withdrew one from the other, and they didn't draw close to each other, and they didn't sing shira in a way that the Mitzrayim could hear. The lesson there is a very powerful one. We see it in a number of different places where HaKadosh Baruch Hu places the honor, the kavod of the Jewish people over his own. He's more concerned about their honor, the importance of the Jewish people. That's a fundamental theme of Pesach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu acknowledges B'ni B'chori Yisrael, of all my children, every human being. Every human being is a child of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the Jewish people enjoy a special bond with Hashem, and we enjoy special love from him. We have taken on a very, very difficult task in history to be his messengers to the rest of humankind, to introduce them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And as a result of that, proportionately, we enjoy a very, very special relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On this Chag, when we celebrate the creation of that bond, the affirming of that, the birth of a nation before we were a ragtag group, a family of Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu. So we did great things in the world. But from this point, Yetzias Mitzrayim, leaving Mitzrayim, rushing to Har Sinai to accept the Torah. So this represents the birthday party, the celebration of the creation of the Am Yisrael as a nation. And we have to be proud of that. We have to celebrate, and we have to recognize our own role in that, to teach Torah to the rest of the world. In order to do that, first thing we need to do is to learn a lot of our own Torah. I can't think of a better way to do that than by attending Livnos College for Women classes. I wish you a Chag Kosher V'Sameach. All the best.